Show yourself.
Show yourself.
I know you're there.
Keep back. I'm warning you.
No! Move! Back! Get away from me!
Back, beast!
You think I'm down? Think again. Not done yet.
I found it. Now we can finally end this. Let's go then. Hey, back. He isn't afraid of that. He will be.
The wind changed first. It came down off the mesa wrong way against the grain of the evening, carrying a smell that didn't belong to sage or dust or horse sweat. The coyotes went quiet, not scattered, quiet all at once, the way a room goes quiet when someone dangerous walks in. A lantern flame in the barn bent sideways, though no door stood open. Cattle pressed themselves into the far corner of the corral and stayed there, eyes rolled white. Then came the knock. 3 raps, low on the door, like a child's fist or a hand trying not to be heard. By the time it was answered, 3 lives were already balanced on the other side of it. The man who opened that door was not in the habit of opening it after dark. 31 years on that stretch of borderland had taught him the difference between a knock that meant trouble riding toward you and one that meant trouble already standing on your porch. This was the second kind. He held the lantern up before he held anything else. No rifle, not yet, though it leaned within reach behind the frame out of old habit, resting quiet against the wall the way a man keeps a thing close without making it a threat. What the light found was not what he expected. An old man, straight back despite his years, one hand pressed flat against his chest as though holding something in place there. Behind him, a woman with a child wrapped so tightly in a blanket that only a pair of dark eyes showed, unblinking, taking in everything. Nobody said anything for a long moment. That was the first thing he noticed about them. How comfortable they were with silence. How it didn't scare them the way it scared most people who came knocking after dark with trouble on their heels. "They're a day behind us," the old man said finally. "English, careful, chosen, maybe less. Who's behind you? Men who get paid for us. Dead or walking, it's the same money." He knew what that meant. Everybody along that stretch of territory knew, even if nobody liked to say it plain. The bounty men who still rode the borderlands, hunting the last of the ones who wouldn't come in, wouldn't sign the paper, wouldn't get on the train east. The wars had ended on maps and in newspapers years back. Nobody had told the mountains that. He looked at the woman, at the child's eyes over the blanket's edge, older than a child's eyes should be. He thought about the $12 folded twice in a tin behind the flour sack. Every cent he had left until the spring cattle sale, meant for a debt of his own, a promise made to a man in town who trusted him on credit through a hard winter. The old man reached into his coat, slow, showing his hand the whole way, and held out a small leather pouch. It clinked. $12. It is what we have. He didn't reach for it right away. That hesitation was its own kind of answer, and the old man watched it happen with an expression that gave nothing back. Not gratitude yet, not relief. Judgment, maybe, like he was still deciding what kind of man stood in this doorway. "Put that away," he said finally, and stepped back to let them in. "Keep your money. You'll need it further on than here." The old man's eyes didn't soften, not exactly, but something in his shoulders changed. The smallest release of weight, the kind a man carries when he's been ready for miles to be told no. He put them in the root cellar beneath the kitchen floor, packed dirt walls and a trap door hidden under a rag rug and a table leg that had always sat crooked ever since. He gave them water, a heel of bread, a wool blanket that smelled of horse. The child never made a sound. not once. He would think about that later, how a child that young had already learned silence as a kind of armor. If this story's already pulling at you the way it pulled at him standing in that doorway, this is the moment to hit subscribe. The road only gets darker from here, and you won't want to miss where it goes. He didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with the lantern turned low, the rifle now within actual reach, and listened to the wind keep changing direction outside, unable to settle, like something out there was still deciding which way it wanted to come from. Near first light, hooves, not the calm plod of ranch horses, fast, several riders hard-driven. He was at the window before they reached the gate. 5 men, dust-caked, one out front with a coiled rope at his saddle and a rifle resting across his shoulder in the lazy, confident way of a man who has never once needed to use it in a hurry, because people always gave him what he wanted before it came to that. The man reined up at the gate and looked at the house for a long, unhurried moment, as if he could smell something through the walls. "Morning," he called out. "Looking for some folks who wandered off where they don't belong. You seen anyone pass this way?" Below the kitchen floor in the dark, a child who had not made a sound all night held her breath. The riders left without searching the house. That should have felt like relief. It didn't. He watched them go from the window, the lead man turning his horse in a slow half-circle at the gate first, head tilted, nostrils working the air like he was tasting something instead of smelling it. His dogs, 2 lean hounds tied off the back of a pack mule, never barked, never bayed. They just stood there with their ears flat and their tails tucked so tight against their bellies it looked painful, refusing to come any closer to the house than the road allowed. A dog that won't come near a house has usually got a reason. He'd grown up around enough animals to know that much. When the dust had settled back into the road, he opened the trapdoor. The old man climbed out first, moving stiffly, and stood a moment getting his bearings in the grey morning light before he spoke. "You know that man." It wasn't a question. "Never seen him before in my life." "I did not say you knew him." The old man's eyes were steady, patient, the eyes of someone used to being disbelieved and unbothered by it. "I said you know him. There is a difference." He didn't answer that, didn't know how to. Over the following days, the family stayed. Word hadn't reached town that anyone was hiding folks, and he wasn't fool enough to go announcing it. The woman, he learned her name was Nadine, though it took 3 days before she offered it. And even then, only after she'd watched him split wood for an hour without once asking her or the old man to help, kept mostly to the cellar by daylight, and came up after dark to sit at the table. The old man was called Hostine by his granddaughter, though he told him plainly that wasn't a name. Just a word for old man, offered the way you offer a stranger something safe to hold before trusting them with the real thing. It was the 4th night when Hostine finally spoke of the land. "This ground you live on, you know its name?" "Just call it the home section, always have." Hostine nodded slowly, like that confirmed something he'd already suspected. "There is an older name. My grandfather's grandfather knew it. A place where a promise was made and later broken. A family gave shelter to travelers in a hard winter, the way you gave it to us. And when the shelter was repaid with betrayal instead of thanks, the land itself did not forgive it. It does not forgive easily even now." "Betrayed how?" Hostine's jaw tightened. For the first time since the door had opened 4 nights before, something moved behind his composure. Old grief, worn smooth by years, but not gone. The ones who were sheltered turned on their hosts for money, sold them to men who wanted them dead. And something in this valley answered that betrayal with a hunger that did not end when the men who caused it did. It passed to the blood that carried the guilt forward. It still walks. He thought of the rider at the gate, the dogs refusing to approach, the wind that had turned wrong way the night the family arrived, like something old had woken and was testing which direction to move. You're telling me that man... I am telling you a debt exists on this land. I do not know yet who is paying it. Hostein's eyes held his, steady and unflinching. I only know that shelter given honestly has always mattered to it, and shelter betrayed has always been answered. Nadin, silent through all of this, reached over without a word and set something on the table between them, small, carved, worn smooth by handling. A sliver of bone, no longer than a finger, etched with lines too old and too worn to read clearly anymore. My grandfather carries this since before I was born, she said, her first full sentence to him in 4 days. He does not explain it. He only says it remembers. He didn't reach for it, didn't feel it was his to hold, not yet. That night, long after the household had gone quiet, he sat alone at the table with the lantern turned low and the bone sliver still resting where Nadin had left it, and he found himself thinking not about the bounty man's rifle or the dog's fear, but about his own family's ledger books going back 3 generations, and how little he actually knew about what his grandfather had done on this land before he was born, and why, exactly. The old man had never once let anybody move that root cellar, no matter how many times it flooded. If this story's got its hooks in you the way that bone sliver had its hooks in him, drop a comment with the city and country you're listening from. It always adds something seeing where these stories travel, somewhere out past the fence line, far enough that it could have been imagination. Something long and low answered the night. Not quite a wolf's howl, and not quite anything human either. He came back alone 3 nights later, on foot, leading his horse rather than riding it. A strange choice for a man who'd seemed so at ease in the saddle at the gate. He stopped well short of the house and called out before approaching, an old courtesy that felt out of place coming from him. "I'd like a word, just me." He went out to meet him on the porch, rifle resting easy in the crook of his arm, not aimed, not hidden either. The bounty man's name, he'd learned before the conversation ended, was Coin. He said it himself plainly, like a man who no longer saw the use in hiding behind anonymity. "You didn't find what you were looking for," he said. "Didn't look very hard." Coin's eyes moved past him toward the house, then away again, deliberate. "That surprised you?" "Some." Coin was quiet a moment, studying the dark tree line beyond the corral, the way a man studies something he's learned not to turn his back on. "I've worked this valley 11 years. Longer than that, if you count the years my father worked it before me, same trade, same territory." He said it flatly, no pride in it. You get to know a piece of land after that long. Get to know what's wrong with it. Wrong with it how? There's a debt walks this ground, older than either of us. Coin's jaw worked once, like the words cost him something to say out loud. My father knew families along this valley who paid it. Whole households gone in a season, nothing left to explain it but torn fence rails and animals, too scared to graze certain fields ever again. And you hunt people through it anyway. I hunt people because it's the only work I know how to do that keeps my own house fed. Coin's voice didn't rise, but something under it tightened. I never asked what happens to the ones I turn in after I hand them over. I told myself that wasn't mine to carry. He looked at him directly then. Woke up 9 nights ago from a dream I haven't had in years. Dreamed my father's face, only it wasn't his face by the end. You understand what I'm telling you? He didn't answer right away. Behind him he was aware, though he didn't turn to check, that the trapdoor beneath the kitchen rug sat directly above where they stood. I'm telling you I've started dreaming the debt, Coin said. That's never happened before. Not to me, only to my father, near the end of his life, right before... He stopped himself. Before what? Coin didn't finish it. He looked instead toward the barn, and something crossed his face that looked almost like fear, quickly folded away and put back behind the mask he wore for a living. Whatever you've got sheltered under that floor, Coin said quietly, it isn't the family the debt wants. It's whoever breaks faith with them next. You understand? The land doesn't care about the color of anybody's skin or which side of a war they were on. It cares who gives shelter and who sells it. He left without asking again what was in the house, left without his fee, without an explanation to whoever waited for him beyond the valley. Just turned, took up his horse's lead, and walked back into the dark the way he'd come, on foot, unhurried, a man already resigned to something he hadn't said out loud. That night, unable to sleep, he took a lantern out to the barn where his grandfather's old trunk had sat untouched for over a decade, and dug down past horse tack and broken tools until his hand found a ledger book, its spine cracked with age, pages gone brittle and brown. The handwriting inside was his grandfather's. The entries went back nearly 40 years, and 3 pages from the end, in ink gone the color of dried blood, was a name he recognized. Not from any family Bible, but from a story his own father had told him once, half drunk and unwilling to finish it, about a group of travelers his grandfather had sheltered one hard winter, and what had happened to them after. He sat in the barn a long time after that, the lantern burning low, understanding for the first time exactly whose death this was, and exactly how close it had always lived to his own front door. He didn't tell them what he'd found, not right away. He put the ledger back exactly where it had lain, closed the trunk, and walked back to the house with something cold sitting low in his chest that he couldn't name yet. The wind changed again, just after midnight. The same wrong-way turn from the night the family had first arrived, sage and dust bending backward against the grain of the evening. The lantern in the barn guttered, though no door stood open. And this time, the coyotes didn't just go quiet. They screamed. He was up and at the window before Hosteen reached the top of the cellar stairs, rifle already in hand, though he held it low, unready, the way a man holds a thing he's not yet sure will matter. "It's here," Hosteen said, not a question. His voice had lost its careful patience. There was only plain fear in it now, the first he'd shown since the night he'd knocked. "It has your blood's scent tonight, not ours." "Why now?" "Because you know." Hosteen's hand closed hard around his arm. "It has always come for the one who understands the debt is theirs to answer, not before." Nadine pulled the child close against the cellar wall without needing to be told. The bone sliver was in her free hand, pressed flat against her palm, her lips moving in words he didn't understand and didn't need to. He went out the front door alone. Some part of him knew there was no sense barring it, no sense hiding beneath his own flaw from something that had already announced plainly which one of them it wanted. It came out of the tree line where the corral fence ended, not running, not yet, walking. Upright on legs that bent wrong at the knee, easily 7 feet at the shoulder, its frame wrapped in matted fur gone dark with something that clung and dripped. Amber eyes found him across the yard and held there, unblinking, patient in a way that felt worse than any charge could have. The rifle came up on instinct. He didn't fire. Some old animal caution in him understood, even as his hands shook, that a bullet wasn't going to settle a debt 40 years in the making. "I didn't do it," he said into the dark, voice cracking. "Whatever he did, I didn't do it." The creature tilted its head, slow, almost curious, the gesture obscene on something built the way it was built. It didn't answer. It didn't need to. It came at him fast, faster than something that size should move, and he threw himself sideways into the dirt as one massive clawed hand tore through the porch post behind, where he'd stood a half-second before, splitting old timber like it was paper. He came up with the rifle swinging, more instinct than plan, and the stock caught the creature across the jaw hard enough to stagger it a single step. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. What saved him was Hosteen. The old man came off the porch steps with nothing in his hands but the bone sliver, walking straight toward the thing without hesitation, and began speaking words in a language that predated every fence line and property deed on that land by centuries. The creature turned toward him, and for one terrible heartbeat he thought he'd traded his own death for the old man's. Instead, it stopped. Hosteen didn't stop walking. He came within arm's reach of it, close enough that its ragged breath must have moved the old man's hair, and pressed the bone sliver flat against what remained of its chest, over a heart still beating somewhere beneath fur and rage and 40 years of hunger. "You are owed," Hosteen said, steady, unafraid. "Not blood, truth." The creature shuddered. A sound came out of it that wasn't quite a howl and wasn't quite a scream, something almost like grief, buried under decades of teeth and fur and violence, finally allowed to surface. He staggered to his feet, rifle forgotten in the dirt, and understood, watching Hosteen stand unarmed and untouched before something that could have ended him in a single motion, that the debt had never wanted a killing at all. It had wanted someone willing to tell it the truth. The creature went still, chest heaving, amber eyes fixed not on him now, but on the ledger book he hadn't realized he'd carried out of the barn and still held crushed in one hand. The proof, finally spoken aloud instead of buried in a trunk for 40 years. The creature didn't leave, not at first. It stood there in the ruined yard, chest still heaving, that low sound of grief still working its way out of a throat, built for nothing gentler than a killing bite. And none of them moved, not Hosteen, not Nadin holding the child tight in the cellar doorway, not him standing with a splintered rifle stock and a crushed ledger, and no plan left for what came next. It was Hosteen who broke the stillness. "There is one more thing owed," the old man said, "not to the creature now, but to him. You have spoken truth. That was the first debt, but truth alone does not end a hunger 40 years fed on silence. Something must be given to replace what was taken. Given how? Someone must agree to carry what your grandfather refused to carry. Not the guilt, the knowing, the understanding of what this land asks, and the willingness to answer it honestly every time it asks again." Hosteen's eyes didn't waver. It does not end in one night. It ends in a lifetime lived correctly after. He looked at the creature, at the amber eyes that had gone somehow quieter. Not gentle. Nothing about that shape could ever be gentle, but no longer hunting either. Watching, waiting to see what kind of man would answer. "I'll carry it," he said, and his voice didn't shake saying it, though everything else in him did. "Whatever that means, I'll carry it." The creature's head lowered, slow, and for one impossible moment it looked less like a monster and more like something exhausted beyond measure. Something that had been asking the same question of the same stretch of earth for 4 decades and had finally heard an answer it could accept. It didn't attack again. It turned, unhurried, and walked back toward the tree line the way it had come, and with each step, the moonlight seemed to peel something off its shoulders. Not visibly, not in any way he could have described to another living soul without sounding half mad, but felt the way you feel, weather changing before the clouds arrive. By the time it reached the fence line, it was gone, not vanished. Simply gone, the way a held breath finally lets go. Nobody spoke for a long while after that. It was Nadin who finally came down off the porch steps, the child asleep now against her shoulder, and pressed the bone sliver into his hand without a word. He tried to give it back. She closed his fingers over it instead, gently, final. "It remembers," she said. "Now it remembers you too." They stayed through the winter, not hidden in the cellar anymore, but openly in the house, the way anyone deserved to live who'd been offered honest shelter. Coin rode out once more alone near the first snow and stood a long while at the gate without dismounting. He never said what he'd come to say. Perhaps he never fully knew himself. He simply nodded once, like a debt settled between 2 men who'd never need to speak of it again, and rode back into a valley that, for the first time in his 11 years working it, no longer felt like it was watching him. Come spring, Hostine and Nadine and the child moved on, north toward family who'd been waiting years to know if they were alive at all. Before they left, Hostine took his hand one final time. "The land will test the next one too," he said. "It always does. But you will know what to tell them when it comes." He kept the bone sliver the rest of his life, carried it the way another man might carry a pocket watch or a father's ring. Not as a trophy, not as a wound kept open on purpose, but as a small, constant weight against forgetting. He told the story only once, late in his own life, to a grandson who would not fully believe it until decades later, standing at the same gate on a wind that had turned wrong way, understanding at last exactly what kind of debt he'd inherited, and exactly what it would ask of him to pay it honestly. Some debts aren't paid in blood. They're paid in the willingness to stop looking away from what our own blood did, from what our own silence cost, from the shelter we owe each other simply because we can give it. The valley never stopped remembering. Maybe that's the truest kind of curse there is. Not a monster in the dark, but a land that insists we carry the truth of what came before us, whether we want to or not. If this story found something in you, stay a while longer. There's always another debt waiting to be told the truth about. Subscribe and let the next one find you too.